So thank you both for joining us today. We wanted to talk about vaccines and particularly looking at what the world could learn from two of the most advanced vaccine programs, campaigns so far, both Israel and the UK having raced ahead of a lot of other countries and getting significant portions of their population vaccinated. In Israel, you've done it largely with one vaccine, essentially so far, right? The Pfizer one. Tell us about that strategy.
So indeed, Israel was fortunate enough to get enough vaccines from Pfizer to allow a very wide vaccination campaign. We, to date, have been able to vaccinate approximately 50% of the Israeli population. When we're talking about the high 90s, 90% and more in the older populations, and the diminishing percentages as we go down in age. So really the vast majority of our population at risk have been covered by what is becoming a 2-dose full protocol for the vast majority of them. And we are beginning to see the benefits of this vaccination campaign these very days as we see a massive decline in rates of severe morbidity, first in the older age groups that were vaccinated first, and then with about a 3-week gap, we now begin to see the decline also in the younger age groups that began getting vaccinated at a later stage.
Kate, what do you think, when will we start to see this kind of thing in the UK as well? We're obviously seeing cases fall. When do we start seeing the vaccines really kick in?
Well, there's data out today actually showing a Scottish study that shows dramatic reductions in hospitalizations from people who've received both the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine. So actually this very much mirrors the data that we've seen in Israel. And I think we'll continue to see that. I mean, the evidence we've seen in the clinical trials is that these vaccines are highly effective and safe. So yes, I would expect to see both reduction in hospitalization, severe disease, and ultimately we'll start to see reductions in transmission.
Ran, you mentioned dosing as well. I wanted to ask you about the dosing schedules have obviously been discussed quite a bit. The UK taking an approach of extending dosing to 12 weeks, or the interval between the doses, in an effort to kind of speed as many first shots as possible. That's not something you've done really in Israel, right? I mean, what do you think of that?
Since we do have enough vaccines and we do have the logistical capacity to vaccinate all of the previously vaccinated people with one dose, with the second dose in time and with no limitation, not logistically, not in terms of vaccine availability, then I see no reason to go stray from the protocol that was tested in the clinical trial and was suggested to be optimal. There is no evidence out there to tell us if there's any problem with extending the deadlines. And in many cases, doing so for vaccines does not cause a harm or a reduction in effectiveness. So if one has a logistical or other limitation, I think that's a fair thing for the scientists in that country to consider. In Israel, we didn't have to. And again, our data suggests that the full effectiveness of the vaccine is witnessed 7 days after the second vaccine. But until we have a good cohort of people who were vaccinated only with one dose and tested at the same time period after the first dose, it will be impossible to say for sure whether this period is less protected until you get the second vaccine, and if so, to what extent.
Kate, it looked like a bit of a gamble when the strategy was rolled out in the UK, but the early signs are positive, right? And it seems like it's working.
Very positive. I mean, again, if you recall, the design of the Oxford study actually enabled them to look at the different immune response with the different dosing schedules between the first and second dose. So even though that data has only recently come out, that data was available to the MHRA when they reviewed it in late December. And therefore, that's, I suspect, the basis of why they allowed the second dosing to extend up to 12 weeks. And again, if you think about how the immune response is triggered in humans, actually 3 weeks is the shortest possible or likely time to actually be able to generate a full immune response, which was the reason why that short period was chosen for the dosing intervals by the different vaccine companies, because that would then enable the quickest possible time to a full clinical package, which could then be submitted to the regulators. Had we not been racing against a global pandemic, actually, I think we'd have seen more trials with extended dosing intervals that then allows that depth of data to evaluate what dosing interval makes sense. And if you look at the 2-dose Johnson & Johnson protocol, that dosing interval is substantially longer. I think it's 56 days.
One of the things that is causing alarm is, of course, the variants. We've got the so-called UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian one, and I'm sure others will emerge. How well do you think, in the end, that will be adapted to to deal with these variants, Kate?
Well, we obviously know that viruses mutate, so part of our strategy has been to ensure that we are able to pivot quickly if there are serious mutations that evade the current vaccines. Now, at the moment, that's not the case. So the evidence we have from the vaccines we've got is that they will address the Kent variant and the South African variant and the Brazilian variant. So if you recall, we have doses coming from Novavax, which shows very profound effects against those different variants. But beyond the Kent variant or the UK variant, we haven't yet seen those variants really take off. So it may be that actually the vaccines we've got will address all the current variants. Beyond that, we have two different strategies. One is to explore what I called heterologous boost, so where you mix and match different vaccines so as to provoke different immune responses. So whether that's mixing with mRNA and adeno or with the protein adjuvant vaccine, or even in our case, Valneva, which is the whole inactivated virus-based vaccine. Those are all different approaches that we can use to try and broaden out that immune response against different variants. And of course, we've invested in manufacturing so that we can actually pivot quickly to update the vaccines to address those potential variants if they evade the current responses. And so again, in our case, that's the relationship that's been done since my time by Clive Dix with CureVac, which will be developing more stable mRNA vaccines for the variants, and also Valneva. And because it's a whole virus-based vaccine, of course, it presents a much broader real estate of viral protein to trigger a broader immune response. So those are the things we've put in place to deal with variants. But I'm reasonably confident that actually that will cover everything we will need.
Ran, you're equally confident, or does your strategy differ with regard to the variants at all?
In terms of my confidence of the availability or the ability of the people that were vaccinated to be protected against emerging new variants, the one thing that will definitely help is the fact that we do vaccinate overall population per protocol with 2 doses, which would bring the titer higher and therefore allow, even if there is some slight reduced effectiveness that is driven by some new variants, the high titers should be able to at least partially tackle that. So this is one part of how we are trying to tackle it. The second thing that we're doing is we have much tighter border control than we've ever had before, in part to try to prevent the importation of new variants in the country. We know we have the Kent, and we know that the South African variant there are an increasing number of cases, dozens for now, but I guess hundreds soon. So border control, the vaccination, and I do agree at some point we will have different strategies, mixing and matching different vaccines, but also I believe that both Pfizer and Moderna will be able to create new adapted vaccines that would be more appropriate for those new variants as they come along.
This probably won't be the last pandemic the world faces like this. What can we do to be better prepared next time? I mean, it is striking that we went from no vaccine to having vaccine rollouts on a fairly wide scale within a year. But how can we get even quicker in the future? How can we respond to this kind of thing on a more global basis? What kind of a standing presence does this need, Kate?
I think there's 2 answers to that. One is quicker and the other is better. So quicker is all about the 2 sort of key bottlenecks, really, which are clinical trials, which is if we need to run studies, how can we do it more quickly so that we can generate that data more rapidly? And there are obviously regulatory implications as well as trial designs. And really, we need to get this so that it's as simple as just updating an annual flu vaccine. And of course, manufacturing. So we need to have that flexible manufacturing capability so that whichever vaccine format is most appropriate for the next pandemic, it can be rapidly pivoted for manufacturing. But I think there's some more important stuff, which is really around how can we do it better? Because the current vaccines, albeit highly effective, are not particularly suitable for widespread distribution around the world. So we have basically costly cold chains and storage, complicated logistics, we're using glass. These have not been rapidly scaled, and we need to really find formats that actually address all of that. So scalable, stable, cheap, ideally no healthcare professionals involved, so no needles, no on-site dilutions. And that is where I think we should be investing to think about how can we develop vaccine formats which are more suitable and less costly for regular deployment.
Ran, what's the best way to do that, to get there?
I think that above and beyond everything that was mentioned, I think that we also have to improve our surveillance mechanisms. It is thanks to the tremendous efforts of the UK that have been doing massive systematic sequencing that we have the information in time for many other countries to prepare for whatever the new variants will bring in. And I think one of the conclusions we need to take towards the next event that will definitely be it coronavirus or influenza or anything else, is that our surveillance mechanisms needs to be harmonized. The data sharing capacity and the standardization of the surveillance systems and the digital data should allow us to reach the conclusions in a quicker way and the data to disseminate in a better way, so we will be better prepared. In terms of the vaccination, I do agree. I think that we need to improve our ability to create less costly and less fastidious vaccines that we will be able to produce quickly and disseminate within all of the different countries, regardless of their capacity to have more expensive logistics in place.